is more extraordinary. Chapter 4, Outbursts of Former Times, page 1054. Nothing is more extraordinary than the first swarming of a riot. Everything bursts out everywhere at once. Was it foreseen? Yes. Was it prepared? No. Where does it spring from? From the pavements. Where does it fall from? From the clouds. Here the insurrection has the characteristics of a plot, there of an improvisation. The first comer takes possession of a current in the multitude and leads it wherever he wants. A beginning full of terror mingled with a sort of frightful gaiety. At first there's shouting, the shops close, the displays of the merchants disappear, then some isolated shots, people flee, gun butts strike against carriage doors, you hear the servant girls laughing in the yards of the houses and saying, "There's going to be a real ruckus." Before a quarter of an hour had elapsed, here is what had taken place at practically the same time at 20 different points in Paris. In the Rue Sainte-Croix de la Bretonnière, some 20 young men with beards and long hair entered a smoking room and came out again a moment later bearing a horizontal tricolour flag covered with crape and having at their head 3 armed men, one with a sword, another with a gun, the third with a pike. And the Rue du Nom des Heures, a well-dressed, pork-bellied bourgeois was with a ringing voice, a bald head, a high forehead, a black beard, and one of those rough mustaches that cannot be smoothed down, publicly offered cartridges to passer-by. In the Rue Saint-Pierre-Montmartre, some men with bare arms paraded a black flag on which these words could be read in white letters, "Republic or Death." In the Rue des Jardinières, the Rue des Cadran, the Rue Montaigu, and the Rue Mondar, groups appeared waving flags on the word section with a number could be seen in gold letters. One of these flags was red and blue with an imperceptible white stripe between. An arms factory was plundered on the Boulevard Saint Martin, as were 3 armorers' shops, the first in the Rue Bourberg, the second in the Rue Michel le Comte, the third in the Rue des Temple. In a few minutes the thousands of the multitude seized and carried off 230 muskets, nearly all double-barreled, 64 swords, 83 pistols. To arm more people, one took the gun, another the bayonet. Opposite the Quai de la Grève, young men appeared with muskets, installed themselves in women's apartments to shoot. One of them had a musket with a matchlock. They rang, entered, and set to making cartridges. One of these women said, "I did not know what cartridges were. My husband told me to." A throng broke into a junk shop on the Rue du Valet Condres and took some Yatong guns and Turkish arms. The corpse of a mason killed by a musket shot was lying in the Rue de la Perle. And then, right bank, left bank, on the quays, on the boulevards, in the Latin Quarter, in the market area, breathless men, workingmen, students, section chiefs read proclamations, cried to arms, broke the street lamps, unharnessed wagons, tore up the pavement, smashed in-house doors, uprooted the trees, ransacked the cellars, rolled kegs, heaped up paving stones, pebbles, pieces of furniture, boards, made barricades. They forced the bourgeois to help them. They went into the women's houses, they made them give up their absent husband's sword and gun, and wrote over the door in white, "Weapons surrendered." Some signs with their names, receipts for the guns and swords, and said, "Send for them tomorrow to the Mairie." They disarmed the solitary sentinels in the streets and National Guards going to their assignments. They tore off the officers' epaulettes. In the Rue du Commissaire St. Nicholas, an officer of the National Guard, pursued by a troop armed with clubs and foils, took refuge with great difficulty in a house he was able to leave only at night and in disguise. Remember that Jean Valjean is actually a member of the National Guard. Remember, he signed up for that to not stick out, because he had to sign up for it. In the Quarter Saint-Jacques, the students came out of their houses in swarms and went up the Rue Saint-Hyacinthe in the Café du Progrès or down to the Café du Sept Billards on the Rue des Mathurin. There, in front of the doors, some young men standing on the post distributed arms. They pillaged the lumber yard on the Rue Transnonain to make barricades. At a single location, the inhabitants resisted. At the corner of the Rue Saint-Avoy and Simon Lefranc, where they destroyed the barricade themselves. At a single location, the insurgents gave way. They abandoned a barricade begun in the Rue du Temple after having fired on a detachment of the National Guard, and fled through the Rue de la Corderie. In the barricade, the detachment picked up a red flag, a package of cartridges, and 300 pistol balls. The National Guards tore up the flag and carried the shreds on the point of their bayonets. Everything we are relating here slowly and successively took place simultaneously in all parts of the city, in the midst of vast tumult, like a myriad of flashes in a single peal of thunder. In less than an hour 27 barricades rose from the ground in the market quarter. At the center was that famous house, number 50, which was the fortress of Jean and his 106 companions, and which flanked on one side by a barricade of St. Mary, and on the other by a barricade on the Rue Maubuée, commanded 3 streets, and Rue d'Arcis, the Rue Saint Martin, and the Rue Aubry-le-Boucher, on which it fronted. 2 barricades at right angles ran back, one from the Rue Montaguer on the Grande Tournée, the other from the Rue Geoffroy Langevin on the Rue Saint-Avoy, without counting innumerable barricades in 20 other quarters of Paris. In the Marais at Mount Sainte-Geneviève there was one on the Rue Montmartre, featuring a carriage door turned off its hinges, another near the little bridge of the Hôtel Dieu, made with a small carriage unhitched and overturned, which within 300 yards of the prefecture of the police. At the barricade on the Rue du Menserres, a well-dressed man distributed money to the laborers. At the barricade on the Rue Genetat, a horseman appeared and handed to the one who seemed to be the leader of the barricade a roll that looked like a roll of money. "This," said he, "is to pay the expenses, wine, etc." A young man of fair complexion, without a tie, went from one barricade to another, carrying orders. Another, with drawn sword and a blue police cap on his head, was stationing sentinels. Within the barricades, wine shops and porters' lodges were converted into guardhouses. Moreover, the uprising was conducted according to the soundest military tactics. The narrow, uneven, sinuous streets, full of turns and corners, were admirably chosen. The area near La Haze, in particular, a network of streets more intricate than a forest. The Society of the Friends of the People, so it was said, had assumed the direction of the insurrection in the Quartier Saint-Avoy. A man killed in the Rue de Poncet was searched and had a map of Paris on him. What had really assumed the direction of the uprising was a sort of unknown impetuosity in the atmosphere. The insurrection had abruptly built the barricades with one hand, with the other seized nearly all the posts of the garrison. In less than 3 hours, like a trail of powder catching fire, the insurgents had invaded and occupied on the right bank the arsenal, the mayor's office of the Place Royale, all the Marais, the Popincourt arms factory, the Gaillot, the Chateau d'Eau, all of the streets near the markets, on the left bank the barracks of the veterans, Saint-Moulins, all the city gates. At 5 in the afternoon they were masters of the Bastille, the Lingerie, the Blancs-Manteaux. Their scouts touched the Place des Victoires and threatened the bank, the barracks of the Petits Pères, and the Hôtel de Poste. A third of Paris was involved. Okay, so this shows you the extent of what Marius is walking into to be part of it. And remember, it is because he believes Cosette is gone, and so he has no reason to live anymore. At all the points, the struggle had begun on a gigantic scale, and from the disarmings, from the domiciliary visits, from the armorers' shops hastily invaded, there was the result that the combat, begun by throwing stones, was continued by rifle fire. Around 6 in the evening, the Arcade de Saumon became a battlefield. The rioters were at one end, the troops at the opposite. They fired from one gate to the other. Another observer, Dreamer, the author of this book, who had gone to get a close view of the volcano, found himself caught in the arcade between the two fires. He had nothing but the protection of the pilasters that separate the shops to protect him from the bullets. He spent close to an hour in this delicate situation. Meanwhile, the drums beat the long roll. The National Guards hurriedly dressed and armed themselves. The legions left the town halls. The regiments left their barracks. Opposite the Arcade de l'Ancre, a drummer was struck by a dagger. Another on the Rue du Cygne was assigned by some 30 young men, who destroyed his drum and took away his sword. Another was killed in the Rue Grenier Saint-Lazare, in the Rue Michel le Comte. 3 officers fell dead, one after another. Several municipal guards wounded in the Rue de la Lombards turned back. In front of the Cour Batave, a detachment of National Guards found a red flag bearing the inscription Republican Revolution No. 127. Was it a revolution in fact? The insurrection had made the center of Paris a sort of inextricable, tortuous, colossal citadel. There was the focus, there the clear center of combat. All the rest were only skirmishes. What proved that all would be decided there was that they were not yet fighting. In some regiments the soldiers were hesitant, which added to the frightening obscurity of the crisis. They remembered the popular ovation while in July 1830 had greeted the neutrality of the 53rd of the line. Two intrepid men who had been proven by the great wars, Marshal de Lobau and General Bugeaud, were in command. Bugeaud under Lobau. Enormous patrols, composed of battalions of the line surrounded by entire companies of the National Guard, and preceded by a commissioner of police with his badge, went out reconnoitering the insurgent streets. On their side, the insurgents placed pickets at the street corners and boldly sent patrols outside the barricades. They kept watch on both sides. The government, with an army in its hand, hesitated. Night was coming, and the tocsin of St. Mary began to be heard. The Minister of War of the time, Marshal Soult, who had seen Austerlitz, observed this with gloomy countenance. These old hands, accustomed to correct maneuvering, and having no recourse or guide except tactics, that compose the compass of battles, are completely lost in the presence of that vast foam called the wrath of the people. The wind of the revolutions is not tractable. The National Guard of the suburbs hurried together in disorder. A battalion of the 12th Light ran down from the St. Denis. The 14th of the line arrived from Courbevoie. The batteries of the military school had taken up positions at the Carrousel. Artillery came from Vincennes. Solitude reigned at the Tuileries. Louis Philippe was full of serenity. Okay, so this shows that although right now the insurgents have control of their barricades, the military has surrounded them. They just aren't really sure yet what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So Marius is heading into a losing battle, a definite losing battle. So we're going to pick up at 7, the man recruited in the Rue de Billettes, and that's on page 1104. That's where we're going to pick up, 1104.